time for cash tags. For that, let's bring in our next guest. That's going to be Landon Swan. He's a co-founder at Likefolio. Welcome back to the show, Landon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Likefolio data, I'm wondering because PayPal is down about 3% this year. It's been lagging for a couple of years. Hey, they've got over 420 million people on their platforms, Landon, but that doesn't equate to maybe growth. And we've seen those numbers stagnate here a little bit. Do you guys have the data that kind of backs up the weakness here that we're seeing in PayPal?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weakness. If you look at like a 3-year chart of this company, it's insane. I mean, it looks very different than the 1-year chart. 1 year, you're like, all right, we're kind of holding steady. But when you look at the 3, you're like, whoa, where did we used to be? It was so much higher. So this is way, way off from highs. This is an old name. I mean, this was like pioneer in the internet. They were part of eBay back in the day. They were huge. They kind of fell off. They're making a little bit of a comeback. Venmo's helping them out quite a bit. So it's really interesting to see, the evolution of PayPal. They did get upgraded this week. They do have a low PE ratio and only 15. And I will say that, they had a period of declining user base that started in 2020. Every quarter from 2020 until last quarter was a decline in user base, and they added 2 million this last quarter. So they snapped that, right? They reversed that downtrend. The good news is that their total payment volume's up about 14% on a year-over-year basis. Their transactions per account is at an all-time high of 60. So there's a lot of potentially good news as to what's happening. Like maybe the bleeding has stopped, right? But the bleeding is real. I mean, when you look at the total mind share of users talking about PayPal versus Shopify and Square, PayPal's at 73% right now, and 2 years ago they were at 82%. So that they have dropped significantly. They're losing to the competition, and honestly, it's mostly PayPal, not the Venmo brand. So PayPal, we've seen a plateau or a fall off, but Venmo is actually doing fairly well. But this mind share chart, here's what I'm talking about. Basically, it's sitting at 74%. This looked like 2 years ago that PayPal slice was at 82%. So Square and Shopify are starting to expand at the expense of PayPal. So they're really taking market share away there. But yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, is this PayPal? Is this Venmo? What's going on between the two? And it's, obviously PayPal is a huge user base compared to Venmo, but Venmo brags and has users that have about 22% higher disposable income versus those users of Cash App. So these are the better users to have on Venmo. They've got 90 million US users. But you can see here in the chart when you break out the brands, the growth just isn't there. I mean, that's why the stock chart looks like it does, is because they just haven't been able to do much. Now, they've got a lot of initiatives. They've got a lot of goals that they're trying to turn things around. You talked about the new CEO, and this is a stop the bleeding situation. And frankly, the stock price, if you look at it, it's fairly low. I mean, you could talk about how it's kind of in the lower end of the 6-month channel, but a 3-year chart is extremely low. But I think deservedly so. They've lost a lot of market share. They've got a long way to go to come back. And I think it's an aggressive stance to take now to say that they're low enough and we're seeing the ship turn around. We're seeing the very first inkling of maybe the bleeding has stopped, maybe the ship is turning around, and it might be a good buy. But for me, I got to wait for a little bit more data to confirm that they're actually turning the ship in the right direction, and maybe this could be low, when we look at it years from now. But right now, I'm not convinced.
So Landon, when you have this data set, especially that mind map that you kind of called it out here, you're talking about total mentions. Do you have any insights into positive sentiment, or is it negative sentiment? Are you putting all of them in just one basket? Because I would kind of look at that data too, because you said that there was actually increasing last year, but the stock was sliding and their experience was sliding. So is that kind of an inverse correlation when you're looking at some of these fintech players in the space?
Yeah, we didn't include any sentiment data today because there's not a huge talking point on that. PayPal's slightly lower than Venmo, but across the rest of them when you're looking at the competition, there's really not a lot to say that people are unhappy with, Venmo and happy with Cash App, something like that. The numbers are all pretty close. So we're actually mostly looking at how much people are talking about them. What's the web visits look like, just as a volume metric, really. And I think the main thing here is that that mind share has moved so much. I mean, that's a big number to go from 82 to 74 in just a couple of years. But like we talked about, over this last quarter, they stopped the 3-year bleeding trend, and they've actually added some users. So we'll see if that starts to bottom out and maybe potentially grow.
Landon, when you look at the competition in this space, like I don't use PayPal or Venmo anymore. I use Zelle, right? Because all these banks are interconnected. I don't have to have another account. Is that part of the problem? And then also now with the new tax laws in place for a lot of these, where you can just transfer money to somebody, you've got to report all that stuff. Is that causing some problems and headwinds for this company?
That is probably, you talked about sentiment. That was probably the biggest negative spike among these companies that we've seen is that tax law. And, knock on wood, maybe November something will change with that. Well, who knows? But yeah, I think that's definitely a potential problem for these companies. I think the limit's $600, right? I mean, that's peanuts. And everybody's making $600 transactions all the time over the course of a year. So yeah, I think that's going to be a definite problem. And yes, to your other question, absolutely. The competition is tough. I mean, back in '99, PayPal was groundbreaking technology, and now it's just, anybody can create a platform like this. Banks are getting in on it, so they have a lot of competition coming from different angles. I think the key is going to be UI and UX. How easy is it to use these platforms? What's the user experience like? Because, like you said, if you can just connect your bank and then Zelle somebody some money, why use PayPal? So the PayPal has to have a very strong user interface, very strong user experience, and people are going to go where it's easiest. It's all going to be cheap. There's really not a lot of margin on the user to user side. Where the margin lies is on the merchant side, and that's actually pretty interesting for PayPal. They're launching this what they call Fast Lane, which is, I guess, their kind of answer to Square. It's a checkout services. They're in test mode right now. They've got high conversion rates, and so they're looking to answer the market's questions about how can you become more viable. And I think that's a really good potential solution for them. We'll see what adoption looks like. We'll see what those conversion rates look like, because in the end, merchants are going to use whatever gets them the most money. If it's Square, if it's PayPal, if it's just standard checkout, we'll see. But I like that they're at least trying.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Susquehanna upgrade price target up to $71, positive from neutral also. All right, great stuff, great data. As always, Landon, have a great day. Have a great holiday.